Okay, thank you for joining us. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Stephen Evans, the Chief Executive of the National Secular Society. Welcome. Thank you to you all for joining us for this year's Bradlaugh Lecture. So I'm sorry that we can't be doing this in person in Manchester, as we'd originally hoped, but as you'll know, rail strikes have again derailed our plans, if you forgive the pun, for an in-person event. So apologies to anyone whose plans were messed up, but that does mean that there are more of you able to join us this afternoon than there otherwise would be, perhaps. So anyway, welcome to you all. Right, so this week marked the 190th anniversary of the birth of Charles Bradlaugh, the man whose lecture this lecture is named after. The man sit behind me as well in form of bust, and who formed the National Secular Society back in 1866. Now, for those of you not familiar with Bradlaugh's story, he was elected in 1880 as an MP by the people of Northampton. Bradlaugh was then refused permission, though, to take the religious oath, which was necessary to take his seat in Parliament. So religious discrimination very much denied him his seat in Parliament. When he finally won the fight for the right to take his seat, Bradlaugh then brought about a change in the law to ensure that non-religious MPs could affirm rather than have to swear a religious oath, a right enjoyed by many MPs who sit in Parliament today. And to this day, we're still working on multiple fronts to challenge discrimination and religious privilege to ensure that everyone can live their lives in an open and secular society, free from the imposition of other people's religious beliefs. Now, one issue that the National Secular Society has dedicated itself to throughout an entire existence is freedom of expression. Former NSS President George W. Foote spent time in prison for his parody and his satire of religion. So we've gone from being prosecuted for blasphemy to being instrumental in its abolition, at least in England, Wales and Scotland. Northern Ireland, still very much a work in progress. But despite the gains we've made, in some ways, I suppose, threats and barriers to free speech and expression remain as present today as they did perhaps in Bradlaugh's day, albeit often coming from different directions. So in today's world of echo chambers, cancel culture, extremism, self-censorship, an unwavering commitment to free speech as a positive value is vitally important. And today's speaker has been on the front line of debates around religion and society now for many years, and his curiosity, his ability to engage with diverse perspectives, and his commitment to upholding the values of free and open debate make him, I think, the perfect choice for this year's talk. Now, Nicky Campbell will be known to all of you, I'm sure. He really needs no introduction. A writer, broadcasting giant who's been entertaining and engaging us all for many years now on radio and on TV, and more recently in an award-winning podcast with his wit, his warmth, his wisdom, his unwavering commitment to the truth. I'm absolutely delighted that he'll be joining us today. So Nicky will speak for around half an hour or so, and then we'll put your questions to him. So do send me any questions you have as soon as you have them in the Q&A function that you should find in the bottom of your screen. Okay, so without further ado, let me hand you over to Nicky Campbell. Thank you, Nicky.
Thank you very much, Stephen. I'm very honoured to have been asked to talk today. And as Stephen said, it's such a shame it wasn't in Manchester, you know, in the flesh, as it were. That would have been great. But this is good. And yes, I've had a few thoughts over the last few days. I've had a few thoughts over the last 14 years as the presenter of the big questions. I'll come. What a journey, as they say. I'll come to some of those soon. But I think I've got a lot to get off my chest. I'm like a coiled spring. My temptation to scream during so many of those debates. You do know you are talking bollocks, don't you? But you have to do it in subtler ways. That's the whole thing. So this might not be so much Bradlaugh as pub bore. So it's like, let me rant, please, let me rant. Sunday afternoon after the Sunday morning, it was always red wine time. But I loved it. I absolutely loved it because I love that stuff. So coming up, perhaps not the best structured, most coherent, cogent, or well-argued lecture, but I have plenty of tenuously connected rants for you after 14 years on that program. What a journey. And again, using the vernacular of the reality show, the game show, I was in my comfort zone. I love exploring what people believe and why they believe it. I actually, after doing the show for some years, thought about writing a book called What If They're Right? But I never got around to it. Life got in the way. But over those 14 years, there has been climate change. And I'm not talking about meteorology. I'm talking about the climate of discourse and disputation and debate, what we can and can't talk about. The walls have got bigger and the gulfs between us have got wider. And I think at the end, the show was out of step with the times. I think there was a feeling amongst some executives that it was perhaps too confrontational for a Sunday morning, stirring things up. People might find it offensive that somebody was questioning their belief system, slagging off their belief system, their dearly cherished belief. Some belief systems over the years have become more equal than others, which is pernicious, and it's dangerous, and it's counterproductive, and it's utterly illogical. But all good things come to an end. And in BBC meetings, I feel that the word debate was rather being substituted for discussions, and then we were creeping towards confabs, and then we were getting to cozy chats, and robust argument about belief was increasingly, as I say, seen against the tenor of the times. And religious shows perhaps need presenters who talk to you as if your dog's just died. And we didn't do that. There's a TV and radio phrase, a bloody good row. Let's get a bloody good, I do a phone in every day. Let's get a bloody good row. And it's a strange phrase to the outsider, but it means an engaging conversation, robust conversation. But that phrase is increasingly and has increasingly become anathema to many. But I think a frank and lively exchange of views is a wonderful stress test, not of belief, not least your own belief. And at times we do find, and I've seen it and I've experienced it, consensus coming out and mutual understanding, which is gold dust, or even letting viewers come to their own conclusions after what they've heard. Heaven forfend, as they say. Or, something you hear rarely these days. Oh, I never thought of that. You may be right. A phrase there from a rapidly vanishing past. But I've got some marvelous big questions memories from over the years. I'd like to share a few, some real sweet moments and some cherished vignettes that dance across my mind and cheer me up. Many from the green room. There's one I love. And it was in the green room. I think it was in York, and it was before one of our shows, because if you watched it, we used to travel around the country. This was the room, of course, where everyone sort of has a coffee and a biscuit before the show. Very often people who thought the people they were sharing custard creams with were actually destined for the burning oils of eternal torture, but the niceties continued. And there on a sofa was an evangelical Christian having a cup of tea and a custard cream with a Satanist. And I just remember looking at them, chatting to each other and thinking, this is wonderful. This is brilliant. This is an LSD trip. And I know what you're thinking. How can someone, evangelical Christian and a Satanist, how can someone take those dangerous beliefs and twisted values and subsume them into a design for life and death? It's unbelievable. And the same goes for the Satanist. But of course, the evangelical Christian was trying to get a soul for Jesus, and the Satanist was trying to get the last custard cream, I reckon. So let's face it, Aleister Crowley did always take the biscuit. Excuse me, a couple of those on the way through. And also the looks on people's faces in the studio when they realized that the nice person that they were speaking to in the green room actually believes that with prayer, Jesus can make your leg grow back, or pain in childbirth in women is a punishment for Eve's temptation. Seeing the facial expressions and those truths dawning was a very beautiful thing. But our philosophy on the program was ultimately, and at heart, respect, parity of esteem. All beliefs were of equal importance, treated with a healthy respect and treated with a healthy disrespect. And all the team thought that. Now, this is nothing like the kind of, climate deniers and scientists being treated with parity, or creationists and scientists given parity. That's completely different. No, that's a parody of parity. No parity necessary there, because with creationism, for example, you've got paleontology, comparative anatomy, and biogeography, and paleobiology and organic chemistry, geology, cosmology, microbiology, molecular biology, phylogenetics, primatology, embryology versus the Flintstones. So we don't have to worry about that. And the only place debates on that issue are taken seriously, Stephen mentioned earlier, in Northern Ireland. That's another story. But when I mean parity, I'm talking in terms of unfalsifiable supernatural belief or lack of belief, the purity of parity. And of course, a lot of believers in there didn't think that it was a good thing, because they thought that they had the truth and they had the answer. Well, tough. It's the old joke, isn't it? You get to heaven, St. Peter's at the gates, and St. Peter says, when you go past that room, be very, very quiet. He said, why is that? He says, because the Catholics are in there and they think they're the only ones here. That is a real mentality. It's good examples of some of the debates in the past. One of them was, should we ever make fun of religion? It was an absolute cracker. Point out the absurdities and the inconsistencies. And I was able to say to an imam who thought it should actually be illegal to make fun of religion, I said, so you are saying that we should never mock religion? He was immovable. He was steadfast in his belief it should be illegal. I said, so you're denying me the right to make fun of the beliefs of L. Ron Hubbard and Scientology and Thetans and intergalactic battles? An answer came there, none, rather than bluster, fluster. That's different. Mock all religions except for mine. But I look back at all the debates, and I got a list of them when Stephen asked me to do this talk, do this thing. And I got my old producer, Joe Robinson, who's a genius at coming up with great questions. And I looked through all the questions, and it's a kind of yardstick of how things have changed. And as I read them, I got lost in a time warp of nostalgia for a more honest, a braver time. It's like a lost world. And that some of those questions, could we do them now? Absolutely not. It's a fascinating yardstick as to where public discourse is, how sensibilities have changed as well, and have been changed. How much the anti-secular mission has crept. It's really like going back to another age. One example is before the big questions. I think it was before the question. Yeah, 1998. I was doing phone-in on 5 Live, and Miss World was taking place in Nigeria, in Lagos, and it was because of that. It was kicking off in the Muslim north of the country, that bizarre carnival of immodesty was taking place, and pretty fundamentalist in the north. So it's quite a juxtaposition. There were serious riots and serious discontent and threats of serious violence as well. And our program meeting was about a dozen people thinking about what we could debate. And somebody mentioned that. And I said, a dozen people, BBC types, we're not talking about the EDL. And I said, how about, and it's the only time I ever come up with a decent question, how about which oppresses women more, Miss World or fundamentalist Islam? And everyone thought, oh, that's good. Yeah, it's a spine tingler, isn't it? It's great. And we did the debate, and it was lively and fascinating, balanced and tasteful, and we learned a lot. We had some fascinating insights into Wahhabism and Quranic verses and Western hypocrisy, which is always fertile territory for discussion. Was there a rumble of discontent? Not a bean. Not a bean from anyone who heard it. I think there were a couple of calls from World Service saying, why are you doing this? Why are you doing this? And my producer said, listen to it, and then they listened to it and thought, oh, okay. Now, if I mentioned that debate now, and I have done, I said, which is more oppressive to women, Miss World or fundamentalist Islam? Jaws hit the floor. You know, here we are, how many years on? Quite a lot. People scurry and hide under tables. I think that's really interesting. So looking back over 14 series of the big questions, we asked hundreds of questions. We had nearly 1,000 debates because there were 3 a show. Most shows. Sometimes we did 1 debate specials, but there were 3 most shows. Staying with the Muslim question, does Britain, 2011, does Britain have a problem with Muslims? And again, no one blinked an eye. Just, oh, that'll be interesting. And it was respectful and intelligent and knowledgeable and passionately debated. And it helped puncture prejudice. You know, how else do you puncture prejudice? You've got to see it and hear it and confront it if you want to puncture it. And it was a chance for people to come on and dispel myths, make distinctions, outline nuance. And we had some very distinguished and articulate members of the Muslim communities who were in there, and nobody went out and said, "Oh God, that's outrageous! You did that debate." That you can do now. You know, things have changed because now people don't hear. And I get this every morning to my phone. People no longer hear, does Britain have a problem with Muslims? They hear, Britain has a problem with Muslims. The basic grammatical formation is lost on them. And it didn't used to be like this. And I don't fully understand why it is like this. I mean, and we used to all the time, whatever religion, question texts and point out absurdities and, highlight misogyny. As, I do that with the Quran, we do it with the Bible, I do it with the Book of Mormon. I do it with, Joseph Smith, and I do it with, the writings of Jordan Peterson or Richard Dawkins, or the rambling quasi-intelligent columns of Boris Johnson. Anything. It's all fair game. It all has to be on a level playing field. The same rules for all. And let me fall back on the regular and familiar and perhaps cliched reference library of quotes from Christopher Hitchens. If someone says to me they're offended, I say, and your point is. We weren't obsessed with Islam in this country, but I think it's interesting how we couldn't do some of those debates now. Looking at the big debates, the big ratings debates, burqa meant huge ratings. Whenever we talked about the burqa, couldn't do that debate now. Can you imagine? And there's so much to explore, and it's so interesting, and all the questions about sexual objectification of women coming in so many forms. Sometimes, some people would argue, sometimes in a black cloth. You can say that. It's really peculiar, and it's really worrying. The biggest debate we had, the biggest rater over 14 years, was do animals go to heaven? Which is you might be thinking, what? But it's a perfect multi-dimensional debate of epistemological beauty, because you've got the concept of a soul, you've got discussion around an anthropocentric Judeo-Christian monotheistic worldview, universe view, you've got the Vedic religions, you've got the concept of the afterlife, you've got animals, the lion lies down with the lamb. You've got human evolution, Australopithecus. Are Australopithecines in heaven? Neanderthalis, Homo neanderthalis, Homo erectus, Homo habilis. At what point is heaven habitable by habilis? And the higher primates, who are more like us than religious scholars realize, because they need to read more books. Heaven for them. It's got everything, that debate. It was absolutely fantastic. Some more debates, just to wet your whistle, because I just enjoyed them. Does God have a sense of humor? Does loving your neighbor demand an open immigration policy? Does God care what you wear? Are liberal values destroying Britain? You see, now that would be liberal values are destroying Britain. Can immigration stem Britain's moral decline? Can you commit adultery online? Some of these would be great now, but this is just reminding me how much fun I had on a Sunday morning before I spoke to myself in wine on a Sunday afternoon. interesting, is homosexuality a cause for celebration? Again, no one said, how dare you do that debate back then. Would Britain be a better place if we all practice a faith? Nice. Do the BNP have a right to be heard? I'll come on to that. Should Britain ban the burqa? Does Islam encourage violence? Do all religions deserve equal status? Is a pub more important than a church? Is paganism more relevant than Christianity? Can you be a Christian but not believe in God? Oh, I love this stuff. God, I miss it. Normally, see, now on a Saturday, I'd be in a production meeting somewhere in the UK, and we'd be talking about tomorrow morning. But I mean, I'm loving what I'm doing here, but I do feel very nostalgic for it. This one, is it time to draw a line under the Holocaust? Inevitably, howls of protest from hundreds of people globally. It was the grapevine job. Word spread, none of whom saw the program. And those howls of protest were rather undermined by the two rabbis in the studio who pointed out it was a standard A-level question. Are liberal values destroying Britain? Immigration destroying British values? Give people an opportunity to debate, and let's beat the bigots. Beat the bigot. What a game show. My first death threats actually came from the far right. It was an online thing on Breitbart, and it was written by the chap, you might remember, he was in the golden lift at Trump Tower with Donald Trump and others after that victory. I think they were quite in with all that lot. I said at the end of the big questions. Okay, thanks very much for watching. And next week we've got an hour-long special, and we're going to be discussing free will, inshallah. So we'll see you then. By the time I'd gone off and along the corridor, it was 2 death threats on Twitter because I'd said that. From the far right, and the guy on the lift on Breitbart said that I was leading the Islamification of the British media. But there we are. Another example of different standards being applied to different people, an unflat playing field, an unlevel playing field. The question, have some of us been here before? Now, it's a very good example of religion getting judged by different standards. It's a key theme to what I'm trying to say here. A free pass because it's religion. Now, I had one conversation with an intelligent chap, and I said, we're discussing whether we've been here before, reincarnation at the weekend. He said, what? I said, yeah, we're going to discuss reincarnation. So I thought this was a serious debate show, not Jerry Springer. That's a reincarnation. That's a bonkers fucking crankfest, I said 2 billion or so people on the planet believe in reincarnation. This is at the heart of the Vedic religions. And he did a volte-face. He went, oh yeah, of course. Yeah, well, that should be very interesting. It's a beautiful concept. It's all about the cycle of life. He turned on a sixpence like Kenny Dalglish. The other thing I want to talk about is the word platforming. I have a problem with it. It's a troublesome concept. It's a troublesome word. It's a troublesome thing altogether. And the definition of platforming is moving as well. When Rupert Murdoch stepped down a week and a half ago, we did a phone-in on 5 Live about his legacy. It's because the definition of platforming has moved to not having someone there, but discussing someone's ideas. And I got quite a number of texts saying, you should not be platforming Murdoch. And I said, what? I thought, what? I looked around the studio, no Murdoch there. I thought, if only, because if only, you'd be able to talk to him. You'd be able to tell him what you think of him. You'd be able to hear his response. Wouldn't that be good? You could talk to him about Hillsborough. You could talk to him about Millie Dowler, ask him stuff, put him on the spot. Once during the big questions, we were talking about free speech and freedom of expression. I was on a university campus. I can't remember where, but they had banned Nigel Farage. They'd no-platformed Nigel Farage. I'm not a massive fan. I'm not the world's biggest fan of Nigel Farage. But, I said, so you ban Nigel Farage? You do? Okay. What about Aung San Suu Kyi? I said off the top of my head. I think I said it right at the time. And she said, oh, yeah, that would be good. That would be brilliant. There's a woman accused of being complicit in genocide. Whatever you say about Nigel Farage, I don't think you can level that at him. Amal Rajan did a brilliant documentary about the anniversary of the Rivers of Blood speech, and relatively recently, and the times they were changing already and rapidly. And there were screaming howls of protest about the fact that this was being broadcast on the BBC, and there was a massive campaign to keep it off the air. And I'm very much of the opinion, don't listen, and I thought that was extremely worrying. It was a case of cancelling history. My daughter's at Oxford University, my youngest at the moment, and she attended massive protests recently against somebody talking there. And when she came back, I said, well, what about free speech? What about just hearing them out and arguing with them? And she said, but Dad, you don't realize how much she's upset people. Which I thought was interesting. The no platform thing. If you have a debate about EDL, you can't do it. I'm talking about back in the day. You can't do it without Tommy Robertson. If you had a debate about Almuja Haron, you cannot do it without Anjem Choudhury or one of those guys. And a very good example of that is when we had some of his guys, we had some of his lads on, Anjem Choudhury, a bunch of his acolytes. He couldn't make it. And the other debate in that particular program was, has football lost its soul because of all the money in the game? And so I was chatting to these lads in the green room, the famous green room, and I said, oh, so okay, well, all right, we'll come in and I'll bring you in and you can come in and we've got their own on the show and stuff like that. And I said the other debate is about, has football lost its soul? Do you think you'd have anything to say about that? And one of them said, yeah, we could talk about what football stadium, what we would use football stadia for in an Islamic state. I said, what would you use it for? He said, we'd use it for public executions. And so I said, oh, that's you should say that. That's really interesting, And so when I came to it in the debate, I said, well, what about all the Emirates and all the stadia? What do you think? What should happen to those? And the guy, he said, I think they should be used for public executions. And of course, the whole room howled with horror and a little bit of laughter. People were moving in their seats thinking, oh, MFG, all that stuff. So by platforming them, we actually gave them a chance to hear themselves and to hear the reaction out of their, what was the phrase Stephen used earlier on, out of their echo chamber into a much bigger chamber with many more people. Robert Burns, would some power the gift he gives to see ourselves as others see us? That's the power of free speech. That's the power of debate. That's the power of platforming people. Another great example, I referred to, should the BNP be given airtime or whatever that debate was. Remember the kerfuffle and hoo-ha about Nick Griffin appearing on Question Time. The screaming cacophony of outrage. How dare the BBC? He was an elected representative at the time, and our floor manager on the big questions was also the floor manager on Question Time, and he told me his palms were shaking and sweaty, and I think he was realizing the challenge he had ahead of him. And after it all, there was the best line was from one particular journalist who said, we were expecting Oswald Mosley and we got David Brent. And I thought, that was beautiful. You don't solve problems by not discussing them. If this were a family, things would fester and they would simmer, and it's an unhealthy environment. It's a family at war. It's a dysfunctional family. And the double standards that fly in the face of equal status, I encountered recently as well, fairly recent experience. I referred to Pope Benedict Joseph Ratzinger on social media as a homophobe. That's an example of the phobe suffix appropriately applied. And this was in the wake of an interview with Farage that I did about his candidate, Widdicombe, because Widdicombe had supported conversion therapy. Pope Benedict is a homophobe. He condemned gay lifestyles. He called them an intrinsic moral evil. So it's incontrovertible, and all hell broke loose. I was hoping to say hell until I died. And then because I find that he'd said that paedophilia in the church was a direct result of the sexual revolution of the 60s, I said, not only was he a homophobe, he was also stupid. Now, some people in the BBC were very supportive, but you can imagine the tailspin and the big guns of British Catholicism fired up, peers of the realm, the lot. The BBC complaints department got on to me. And this was the very day that we had an email at the BBC saying we need to be supportive of our LGBTQ plus colleagues. And I got there, we've had some serious complaints about this. And I said, do you want to know what the man said? He said that homosexuality is an intrinsic moral evil. And the person at the end of the phone went, cue head explosion. And at the heart of this is often the racism of low expectations, the best of intentions, but the worst of expectations. It's like that. It's like the trans debate. I mean, J.K. Rowling, you might think very ill of her, you might think well of her, whatever, but her views are nothing to the views of those at any Black evangelical church or any mosque, and many churches throughout the UK. They make her look like Dylan Mulvaney, frankly. But it's a free pass, and it's the liberal cringe. I'm a liberal who cringes at the illiberal cringe. The teacher in Batley, for example, who discussed the cartoons of making sure anyone offended would leave the class, still in hiding. This is mob rule. This is a disgrace. Why do some people always side with religious extremists? At the time of Charlie Hebdo, Will Self, didn't hit anyone, Will Self on Channel 4 News, condemning, but there's always that and making the excuses. Charlie Hebdo this is punching down. Attacking the values of theocracy is not punching down. It's a swift and very necessary uppercut. I'm just looking at the time. It's longer than I thought. Let me move on to a trigger warning for you. I missed a chunk out because I don't want to bore you. The trigger warning is blasphemy, because it triggers me viscerally when I read about it. That would be the current vernacular, trigger. The bubbling up of it in Denmark, for example, the self-evident truth that it is a victimless crime, and most people of faith, grown-ups would agree with that. And I believe that a blasphemy law is indeed a blasphemous concept. And let me take you into that theological hall of mirrors, because it paints God in a very anthropomorphic way. It paints God as a victim. The very notion is blasphemous. It comes from a simplistic anthropomorphic position. It's about an insult to individuals' beliefs. So what? But it's a greater insult that surpasseth all insults, because it's insulting the creator or the prophet or the most perfect human being who ever walked the earth, Jesus, whatever, another perfect human being who ever walked the earth. So if your God or your prophet is furious with an insult, they're not worth worshipping. This is the God who sat down and designed dolphins because can't stand a bit of goading. Shocking anthropomorphism. It's the classic, isn't it? If you say our religion is violent, we'll kill you. And the religious right as well in America, such a threat, an understated threat. Don't forget the people who want to have the nonsense of intelligent design in schools, for example, the nonsense of blasphemy laws, the nonsense of trampling all over the Constitution, have a growing political influence. They are at the beating heart of Republican politics, and they will be at the beating heart, I fear, in the next White House. The late Jerry Falwell, who is the theological father figure, spoke for them and still does. And he said, and this says so much, you and I know there's not going to be any real peace in the Middle East until one day the Lord Jesus Christ sits on the throne in Jerusalem. We've got all sorts of problems there. I claim the right to say that he and his like are dangerous fucking cranks. Creationism. In just the same way it has been mooted, creationism, I believe, is also blasphemy, because, and this is a really interesting theory propounded by Professor Graham Smith in his book Creationism, Design Errors and Cross Purposes, which I read a few years ago. creationism is a blasphemy because it denies the free will to reject God. All bets are off. All Pascal wagers are off, because it's evolution perfectly. It's perfectly feasible to see evolution as God's purpose on knowledge. But if it is Adam and Eve, and if it's 6,000 years old, that's the only show in town, and so free will goes. Evidently, ungrounded theological alternatives to science are an assault on secularism, the balderdash of intelligent design. And the battle in American classrooms goes on years after the Dover trial and will, as I say, ramp up if Trump wins with their support, which I believe he will. He will owe them one. He will owe them many more than one. But no one's silencing them, nor should we silence them. You can say that all 270 species of marsupial leapt from the ark and ran to Australia if you like, just not in my pub, not in my school. Actually, in my pubs, but actually good, but not in my school. That's the fundamental meaning of free speech. Say anything without fear or favor and have legal protection for it. But you know what? Not in my front room if I don't want you to be in my front room. And I hate this word that's entered the vernacular, the free speech mob. Oh, the free speech mob say this and the free speech mob say that, and that. You see that a lot more and more online. It's getting very near the end. I hope you've thanks for tolerating my ramblings, but a few more big questions from the past. Would Jesus be a Catholic? Is it right to save very premature babies? Should human rights always outweigh religious rights? I love this one. Is there more truth in Shakespeare than the Bible? Should we be proud of the British Empire? Are we facing the end of the world? We move on, but I think there should be a place for robust debate on issues such as that. No holds barred, robust, honest debate, platforming people. I do a phone in every day, but there was something about the big questions, something about being in a studio, buzzing, fizzing, people of strong convictions and worldviews, people of deep-seated cynicism, people of profound faith, people of blind allegiance, people of insight and wisdom, people of the book, people of many books, letting them at each other for an hour, letting them hear each other for an hour, letting them hear themselves in a whole new context, and letting them be heard, and letting us make up our own minds, platform them. What are you afraid of? Do you have a lack of confidence in your own beliefs at heart? Do you fear you'll change your mind and then everything will be gone? Genesis 1:3, let there be light. Genesis 1986, land of confusion. We can fix that. Let's talk to each other. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Nicky. If we were in a room in Manchester, there would be a thunderous round of applause now, I can assure you for that. Thanks ever so much for getting all that off your chest. A refreshing, I would say, and fascinating insight into the climate change, as you say, as you put it, around debate, around the chilling of speech. Lots of questions coming in, which we'll get to. And if you have got questions for Nicky, please do pop them into the Q&A feature. We've got plenty of time. We'll get through as many as we can.
I had to cut a whole chunk out because I looked at the time. I tried to work out how much it was, but
maybe what you've got there can come up in the questions. But
indeed. But
the relationship between religion and societies, as you've touched upon, often a source of debate and sometimes controversy. What do you see as the most pressing issues or trends in this area today? Where do you think the contentious issues are around religion and society? I guess you've touched on it. Is it around speech, or where do you think these issues are at the moment?
Well, as I tried to say, it's the bar has been constantly moving as to what we can discuss and what is seen as unacceptable to discuss, and people are too willing to retreat into silos. And also, as I say, I think a key thing here is that many liberals always side with the extremists. And when there were those debates in Birmingham about the relationship, the really good relationship literature with young kids learning about the world and learning about different lifestyles. I read it. It was really good stuff. The people, the people outside. Well, that was actually a classic clash, wasn't it? For the Liberals, it was another head explosion. But the people outside, they come from far and wide, and they're the usual suspects. And then people think, and this is what I mean by the racism of low expectations, and also the liberal cringe. People think they are representative of all, Muslims, and it's just absolute nonsense. The burqa is another good example. When we talk about that particular debate, people would say, oh, you can't do that debate. No, it's insulting to Muslims. No, it's not. The burqa is insulting to millions of Muslims. The burqa is insulting to hundreds of thousands of British Muslims. And so it's that assumption that they are monoliths. That in itself is a form of racism, of very often racism from the left.
Absolutely. So quite a few questions kind of touching on the same thing, really. It's about hope. Where's the hope? Obviously, there was a lot of bleakness in what you said in terms of how the climate has changed. So, a couple of questions. For example, Fiona's asking, saying, how can we make progress if one side of an issue repeatedly states no debate? I think there's been elements of that in the gender ideology identity debate. Just how do you see a way of us moving the dial? What do we need to do to make sure that the climate is right, so we can actually have the debates that you say we were having 10, 15 years ago, but are more difficult today?
Yeah. Where's the hope? We have to talk. We have to have those debates. We have to have that frank exchange of views. That particular debate, there are people there are people who are willing to sit down with each other, but they're few and far between. And the reason that we can't get to that listen, I live in a house. I've got 5 women in my house, and 3 dogs and 5 women, and ranging from 19 to 56. So I understand the range of opinions on that particular debate. I understand the sensitivities. I understand the anger. I understand why there is the polarization. But we can't do it, because we ring up and we say, can you come on? They say, yeah, I can come on. And it's great. I say, great, because we've got Y coming on. Then an X says, I'm not going on if Y is coming on. And Y says, I'm not going on if W is coming on. And W says, if you get X and Y on, I'm not coming on. So no, we can't get anyone to come on. None of them will come on and talk to anyone else and find any common ground. So we've hit an absolute cul-de-sac. And I think it's really, really worrying, because there has to be a way through this. We have to find a way through it. What are we heading for if we don't, in that particular debate? And almost you feel, some people will think I'm taking a stand. I'm really not. I'm taking a stance and expressing opinion on that particular debate by saying we have to find a way through it. Some people will think that is taking an opinion, because both sides will say, how can we find a way through it? What the other side say is, it is reprehensible. So there we are. Where's the hope? I don't know. Bring back the big questions.
Yeah, I mean, so David Boothroyd's kind of asking the question of how difficult is going to be to move the dial when actually people seem to be happier to stay in their silos, their own comfort zone. So he's talking about the emergence of partisan political TV channels, so possibly GB News and the likes of it, kind of possibly a British equivalent to Fox News. Do you think this is a bit of an issue, like the emergence of ideologically driven TV and radio channels?
Well, I think I don't watch it particularly, but I think GB News is quite a good thing, really. As long as they kind of grow up a bit and have more of a plurality of voices. There's nothing wrong with having an antidote to the kind of soft left consensus largely in British broadcasting, the kind of Guardian. There's nothing wrong with that at all. And I think that the Lawrence Fox thing is an example of where people don't understand the meaning of free speech. He can say what he wants, and he should be protected. And he should be able to say that stuff. He can say it in the pub. He probably does. I know he does. He can say it anywhere else. But there should be a line to be drawn. So you're not saying it on an Ofcom regulated, television program without consequences. So free speech doesn't mean saying anything anywhere, going into a class of toddlers and then using the C word. But it means that we need to protect people's right to say it when they want to say it at an appropriate time and an appropriate moment. I think everything should be sayable and should be, beyond hate speech. And you've got another debate there. But I think everything should be sayable. I believe that we should listen to and debate and quash Holocaust deniers with facts, rather than let them fester in the corners and think there's a massive conspiracy against them. It's like the Russell Brand thing at the moment, that's being painted as the deep state have done this against Russell Brand, as if Russell Brand is a massive threat and danger to the stability of British society and the status quo and the Bilderberg group and all that nonsense. But that's what happens. They get driven into corners, and that's why the whole disinfectance of lights, cameras, action is the best thing. Lights, cameras, action, and microphone is the best possible antidote to that, if that makes sense.
Yep. So you mentioned there hate speech, that everything should be allowed apart from hate speech. But I guess part of the problem is the kind of the boundaries keep moving as to regarding what hate speech is, what is hate speech, and the subjective nature of it as well, I suppose, where at least with incitement to cause a criminal action, if someone's inciting another criminal act, that's quite clearly defined. Mm-hmm. But the whole problem of hate speech, we've got Pakistan leading nations at the United Nations to try and get desecration of holy books classed as a hate crime. So yeah, I mean, do you think the label of hate speech is particularly helpful?
No, it's difficult. It's really difficult. And when you say that, and I know that Imran Khan, in a desperate attempt to appease the mullahs when he was politically teetering, was talking about making desecration of the Quran and insulting the Prophet globally illegal. And it chills me. It absolutely chills me. I think it's appalling. And Islamophobia, lots of people have a problem with that word, and anti-Muslim prejudice sits much more comfortably for me. And I think that the line of Islamophobia, the definition of that has moved dramatically in recent years, so that you're almost in a situation where if you're cut up at the traffic lights by and this applies to racism as well. If you're cut up with the traffic lights by somebody and you roll it down and you say, "You can't fucking drive, you fucking wanker," being rude to a Muslim is, in some, the eyes of a small minority, but the significant ones who make the loudest noise, that is the phobia. It's not what you said about them because they are a Muslim, and you get that in racism as well, don't you? It's the mere fact of being rude. Somebody is a protected person. So if I'm making any sense, that's what's changed.
Okay. Question here from Jonathan Posner. Says, "Hi, Nikki. Do you see the current resurgence of fundamentalist religious views as a long-term movement, or simply as a short-term backlash against the growing secularization and progressive scientific thinking?"
Give me that one again.
Do you think the resurgence of fundamentalist religious views is a long-term trend, a long-term movement, or are we seeing the kind of the death throes? Is this kind of a short-term backlash against inevitable and growing secularization?
I think that it's a manifestation of a phenomenon And it's relatively recent, like literalism, for example, biblical literalism, and even Quranic literalism is a relatively recent phenomenon. But I think it's, and this is why America is so relevant, and the troubled world in which we live as well, and all the challenges, all the psychological challenges we have every day to make sense of it. In the past, religion, mortality rates in babies led people to religion. Now there is needing to understand death, needing to understand sorrow, needing to have consolation. Now, of course, there's so many things happening in the world, in the global environment that we know about, that are, for want of a better word, that are complete head fucks. Every morning when you turn on the news, there's something you think, oh my goodness me. I'm a great advocate of animal welfare, and I just see things every day that break my heart. And I see things happening to people all over the world that are shattering, and I think, and people can't understand what's going on around them. And they see everything that goes on around them because of social media and because of the global media, and it's been best described as complexity phobia. And that's one of the reasons why creationism is so strong in the Midwest. It's easy to get hold on. It's easy, 10,000 years old, Adam and Eve, there we are, original sin, now created everything, and that's how it went. You don't need to look into molecular biology at all. And it's just these are shortcuts to an easy way of understanding the world, and I think that's the nature of extremism, because they don't answer complex questions. They simplify everything, and that's why I don't see it as a temporary phenomenon. I see it as something we're going to have to struggle with here on in.
Okay. Question from Peter Telford, who generally agrees with allowing people to speak and to demonstrate how they really think. But at what point do we apply quality control? Is it correct to let people like Nigel Lawson air scientifically illiterate opinions on national platforms, for example? How many times should we go over fixed viewpoints before we start just ignoring them? So, yeah, so all for free speech, but should there be some quality control?
Well, that's not about free speech. That's about ignorant speech, and I have a problem with the fact that Nigel Lawson was, and you hear it all the time. People. It's actually the difference now between. It's a similar evolution, if you like, of the movement in climate denial. It's moved from Nigel Lawson. It's not happening to Peter Lilly. I'm a scientist. Yes, it is happening, but it's not a catastrophe. We're fine. This has been way overplayed, but it is happening. So it's a difference between creationism and it's a similar thing, but and intelligent design. But intelligent design is creationism in a veneer of respectability. And when Nigel Lawson was wanging on about that, I think a lot of people in the organization, one of the organizations I work for, BBC, had a huge problem with it. It's just I think it's just a matter of his being properly countered. It's the same thing as, I'm not ascribing this to Nigel Lawson, but it's the same thing as Nick Griffin appearing on Question Time. I thought it was a triumph for exposing ignorance. As I said, I thought it was a great quote that we were expecting Oswald Mosley and we got David Brent. I think that summed it up absolutely brilliantly and justified it absolutely brilliantly. But yes, I do have a problem with that. But the worst possible thing to do is to silence him completely. Otherwise, he'll have even more, and his followers and acolytes will have even more justification for thinking there is a conspiracy.
Okay, thank you. And thank you, Martin Dorr, for your question. Nikki, are you concerned about the fact that the truth is dependent on who is telling it?
I'm just a TV and radio presenter. Questions like that, honestly, what, like my truth and your truth? And I think that I still hold firm to the belief that there is such a thing as objective truth. Yeah. So the truth as to who's telling it, no, I'm all for objective truth, and I think that question's above my pay grade.
Okay, and Kay asks, what does our country, I think the question is, why does our country lack the courage of the French in banning religious headscarves in schools or niqabs in public? Yeah, I mean, yeah. Where do you stand on this? Because do you think that the French state is right to, for example, prohibit the wearing of ostentatious um, displays of religion in school, in their public servants? They have to have this position of neutrality. They can't wear religious gear. Or are you more in favour of people wearing what they want and no one telling them what to wear? Where do you stand on that?
I'm the latter.
Yeah.
Really, yeah. And I think I I understand all the and I feel very strongly about all the problems with the burqa and the objectification of women. You must not be a sex object, therefore, but the burqa is the other side of page 3. Really, it's objectifying women. Women are, chattels, sex objects that men shall not look at, because men cannot control their lusts. It's quite insulting to men as well. And when I see a 9-year-old wearing a burqa, I despair. But if they banned the burqa in this country, I'd be tempted to march to against the ban.
Okay, so question it, oppose it, but don't necessarily ban it.
Yeah.
But Yasmin, related point, she said, as someone who appeared on the big questions, including the debate on the hijab, I just want to thank Nikki for his support of diversity of views and for tackling difficult subjects. I'm tired of communities being seen as homogenous and sweeping generalizations being made.
That's the problem, isn't it? Sweeping generalizations, communities seen as homogenous, and that's the case with the teacher in Batley as well. So the Tracy Babin, the MP there, has swerved it and she's ducked it. And I think it's a national disgrace what's happened to that teacher and the lack of support that he has had. And part of the problem is those extremists, who are the same extremists who were in Birmingham, they are, the concerned parents are whipped up by them. They're the usual suspects. They go everywhere. And their views about all manner of things would shake you to the core. But of course, they represent the Muslim community. It's like the famous Mo Answer, who appeared on various things. You remember back in the day, he suddenly appeared from nowhere. Mo Answer. I was actually going to talk about him because I got a couple of quotes about Mo. He appeared first off on the big questions. So we were guilty of propelling him into the world, and he became a kind of complete media phenomenon for a while. And it was utterly extraordinary how it's a media morality tale of our times, really. I've just got my notes here. And also a manifestation of our unconscious biases, because we were desperate for somebody like him. We were desperate not to appear racist. But the desperation not to appear racist is in a funny sort of way racist in itself. But so we catapulted him to media fame, a media landscape hungry for guests. And this, because he had the robes and he had the hat, he was every inch the cleric, but he spoke in a media-friendly way. He spoke, the soundbite of the savvy PR man with a bit of a Geezer Watford accent, and he was a perfect package. A friendly mullah, a liberal Orthodox Muslim, which was, of course, an absolute nonsense. But he very easily stepped up there and became the representative of British Islam. And we and Sky and The World at One and Newsnight and Caitlin Moran and David Aranovich and me, we all fell for it because we wanted it to be true. We absolutely wanted it to be true. Jeremy Duns eventually smelt her out and found out he was an absolute con man. He'd said all sorts of stuff. He'd said Hitler was a Jew, Jesus wasn't a Jew, he was a 9/11 truther. CIA created ISIS. Homosexuality was a sin. He'd been misogynistic. He'd been a bully. But I remember, and there was something I took a note of, somewhere. I remember when the scales fell from my eyes, and it was really a truth about the modern media, and it's about how we'd all fallen for it. It was the day after Lee Rigby was brutally killed by 2 fanatics, and I was doing a program from down at Woolwich, and Mo appeared, and he was wearing the robe and the hat, and he had the wee book, and he just appeared. And he then did on CNN. They were all there, all the outlets. So there was a global thing, and he went around from outlet to outlet, doing a bit with them and getting 150 quid or whatever. And I was chatting to him, and this woman from CNN ran up and said, Can you do us at 8:15? Can you do us at 8:15? She says, yes, I'll be over at 8:15. She said, great. We'll see you here at 8:15. And she went away, and then she turned back to him and she went, who are you, by the way? So it was a classic example of, he's there, he must represent everybody. And I think that's kind of what you're saying. I don't think he knew who he was either, but that's kind of what you're saying, I think.
Yeah, it just speaks to the danger, I suppose, of quite lazily thinking that religious leaders represent homogenous communities. I guess there's a classic example of that with our own Anglican bishops in the House of Lords. 26 of them sitting as
completely
Lords.
Yeah,
and the last time assisted dying was debated in Parliament, the bishops bench said they were united against any kind of reforms to assisted dying. Yet, if you ask those in the pews, the Anglicans, around 80% of them seem to support reform of the law around assisted dying. So that's a classic example how you can't really take religious leaders' views and hold them up as something that is representative of the communities they purport to represent.
Or Catholicism. Poll after poll after poll shows that most Catholics do not adhere to the doctrines as set out, so that's another example. Yeah.
Okay, so a question about religious education. Given the this is from Paul. So, given the phenomena of belief and it being so important and at the same time problematic, is it a good idea to teach all children about belief? So, rather than telling them what to think, is it important to tell them about how to think and about beliefs in a critical, pluralistic, objective way? Do you think RE is important in schools, and how would you do it?
Yeah, I don't know, but I think it's critical thinking is absolute. I think teaching belief systems is fascinating. Learning about other belief systems is absolutely vital. Just keep it well away from science. I think that's the thing we've got to do. And some of those Peter Vardy schools, when Blair, about all this, when Blair increased the educational perspectives, and there were people teaching creation, teaching science in schools. We've got to be ever vigilant for that. Who knows what's going on in some of the Orthodox Jewish schools, some of the Orthodox Muslim schools? There's a codicil to this, which is what is very interesting about, and the question I've asked a couple of times of Labour politicians, and it's a good one, is the policy to put VAT on school fees. I'm no fan of, no particular fan of private schools, having been to one myself, which is a hellhole. But the interesting question for them is, all schools are not Eton College, and there are schools which there are Jewish schools and there are Muslim schools which are £4,500, £5,000 a year, a long way from the tailcoats of Eton. The hats, and you're going to drive people into secular education, and of course that's a really difficult question. Good, but it's a really difficult question for them because they're terrified of being seen as being Islamophobic or anti-Semitic. So you'll make these parents who feel that they want to bring children up in their faith are going to be priced out of that. So you're driving them into secular education. What about their rights? And the two replies I've got have been along the lines of, I've never thought of that one. Because we spend our lives trying to think of clever questions like that we don't actually agree with. But it's an interesting one.
Related point here from Khadija Khan. So she says that Suella Braverman, of course, has said recently that multiculturalism has failed. She says she agrees with the statement, but for different reasons. She says the parallel legal and education systems based on orthodox religious beliefs operating in plain sight, contributing to division in society, disproportionate emphasis on religious freedoms has given certain ethnic and religious groups too much leeway to live according to their own cultural and religious norms. This encourages the ghettoization of minorities and toxic identity politics. How can we find a way through when the very state of multiculturalism is so bleak? She said she's not looking forward, not looking for hope from you, really, but she just wants some meaningful efforts and effective measures are needed. Any views on that?
Difficult one lots of it. I have to tread very carefully with all this stuff. It's the BBC, but I have a certain amount of license, having done the big questions for a long time. I hear what you're saying about parallel worlds and parallel societies and silos, but so many of us so many people out there live in their own silos and never see other worlds and are in their own echo chambers. People.
I suppose schools are the golden opportunity, aren't they? If you want to have a more cohesive society, then schools are the golden opportunity to get children from different backgrounds.
I agree.
And educate them together. And
yeah, I agree.
Go down this route of faith-based education, then you are kind of passing up on that golden opportunity, aren't you?
Yeah, I have a problem with my taxpayer money going to fund other people's supernatural beliefs. I do have a problem with that, and there's an immediate assumption there's a sort of more of a kind of moral core to those schools than there are to other schools. That makes me gag.
Absolutely. So you touched on your education just a moment ago, and you have talked recently about being a victim or a survivor of abuse at Scottish private school in the 70s. I know you gave evidence recently as well to the Scottish Child Abuse Inquiry. Obviously, as an organisation, we've done lots of work to hold religious institutions to account and get justice for victims of clerical abuse. Now, you didn't attend a religious school, as I understand it, but we did speak briefly around this a few weeks ago, and it sounded like there was some sort of religious dimension to the abuse that you experienced or witnessed.
Well, only so far as there was a default kind of slightly Calvinistic Presbyterianism to the school. God was an absolute given. I was actually physically abused by the head of the Scripture Union. I was beaten up by the head of the Scripture Union. And I only found out recently that he wasn't able to get another job for 3 years because my mother complained about it. I think I was that sort of thing called, muscular Christianity. They used to term it, kind of Baden-Powell and all that lot. That's what they adhered to. But no, it was a pretty dreadful place, and the amount of abuse going on there was pretty shocking. The first time I encountered it was when I saw my friend when we were 9 years old being abused in the changing room 3 feet away from me, and that's what set me off on this, because I heard Alex Renton's documentary, because my wife reads the news on Radio 4, and I came into the house and she had it on, and she knows what my experiences at school, and she said there's a documentary on here about your sexual and physical abuse at your school. Do you want to? I said I'll go upstairs. She was listening to it. She was a run up to the news. She wanted to find out how to pronounce Volodymyr, and I went upstairs and I started crying. I went into this room and I started, and everything just came back. And the next day I rang Alex Renton. I said, I need to talk to you. Got to Twitter and rang him. And then I said, I've got to tell you about my school. I've got to tell about this guy called Ian. And he went, where's? And it was like that moment that somebody had told the grown-ups. And that's how it started. Ian Ware's still alive. He's abused hundreds of people. That was his modus operandi in class, just marking their books one after the other, hands in their shorts, and also digital penetration as well. Everybody who had a class with Ian Wares was abused by Ian Wares, but there was that thing about which you've spoken about, authority. We didn't question authority, and we thought, if he's doing it, how can it be wrong? And I think it's been a lot easier because I did a podcast on it, and then over the last year there's been a tsunami, and I've spoken to dozens and dozens and dozens of people, not trained for it. It's been difficult, but it's been amazing as well, because hundreds of people have spoken about it for the first time. Easier to do so because parents are dead, and parents, we didn't want to tell our parents because our parents were paying a lot of money for our education, and they, in one way or another, whether it be in a very stern way or whether it be in a very gentle way, all my friends had, you got to work very hard because we're paying a lot of money for your education. So we had that seed in our mind as well. But there was a lot of sexual abuse, and when I mentioned the sexual abuse, we're fighting for his extradition at the moment. But one guy who sexually abused me, a guy called Hamish Dawson, when I mentioned his name when I did the first broadcast, there was a cascade of people who were abused by him as well. And one person said, just hearing his name on The World That Won was the most incredible moment of my life. Hearing his name on the BBC. And the same thing happened with Wares, who at the time was known as Edgar. That was his pseudonym for legal reasons. We eventually managed to change that. We got an MP to do it on parliamentary privilege. And then somebody rang me up and said, can I have a word with you? I was a year below you at school. I said, yeah. He said, so he rang out and said, I've got a name written on a bit of paper. Could you tell me who Edgar is? And I went, Ian Wares. And all I could hear then was the phone clanking onto the ground and a 60-year-old man weeping in the background. And then we spoke, and we both wept. And he says, the first time I've ever addressed it since I left school. And so it opened up a hell of a lot. And they reopened the Scottish Child Abuse Inquiry because of it, and they've done a whole bit on the Edinburgh Academy. So I think it's been a really good thing. I think it's been one of the best things that I've ever done. Better than the big questions. It's changed. It's just changed people's lives, and I set a lot of people free. It's not been easy, but it's been. I was blessed with having a microphone and being able to get that message out there. So, and I'm very proud that the British Podcast Awards the other night, we won the Best Interview Award for my podcast Different, and that was my conversation with Hamish Dawson's daughter, my conversation with my abuser's daughter, because she, she's also a survivor. She lived in a hellish family, and she got in touch. She reached out, as they say, and she's incredible. She's absolutely amazing. We sat down, we had a conversation, and it was the microphones disappeared, and we just talked. I mean, they became invisible, and we just talked. The religious side of the school, it was part of the whole hypocrisy, really. I think all Scottish schools were kind of religious back then. This man used to come in and preach to us, called the Reverend Selby Wright, who is a chaplain at Fettes College. That's where Ian Wares went after he'd abused at our school for 5 years. He went there for 6 years. Great letter of reference, glowing terms, like a troublesome priest passed from parish to parish. Familiar old story. So Selby Wright used to come and preach, and it was like, oh, Selby Wright's coming to preach to us today. And there was in the robes and the red thing, and there was a classic sort of Presbyterian preacher, and he had his war medals on, which was curious. And it's come out in recent years that he was a prolific paedophile as well. So, yeah.
Well done for everything you've done in that area. Well played. So, John McCloskey wants to know your thoughts on thoughts for the day. Obviously, this is the religious slot every morning on the Today programme. So the BBC still ring-fence religious views for thought for the day. Only religious views are allowed on. Non-religious thoughts aren't welcome. Any thoughts on that?
Probably get into trouble if I told you what I thought about that.
Yeah, you're an employer, right?
Yeah, but I think that you can draw your own conclusions from what I've said today.
Isn't it strange though that this is in this days of equality, that this seems to be one of the kind of the last things to fall almost. In some ways, there's lots of privileges that are still out there, of course, but it's just strange that the BBC seems so entrenched in their position on this one, and I don't really understand it myself.
What are their arguments? I don't understand their arguments.
The argument I recall is that, well, there's secular thought and the rest of the programme, and in this little section, that's where we have religious thought, but that's just...
I love that question on the big questions, and I think we did an hour on it. Is there more truth in Shakespeare than there is in the Bible? I love that. And that's kind of in the area we're talking about here.
Yeah.
I thought it was because dare I say, I think there is. And then people say, but you wouldn't have Shakespeare without the Bible. And I think, I don't understand that point. It's like the point, I did something with the humanists recently, and then did something with the humanists recently. And the whole thing about we were created in God's image. And I know that there'll be people here who can explain that, or people here of faith. But we were created in God's image. I don't understand that phrase at all. Don't know what it means. It's a phrase that it's trotted out, I think, without, and some clever theologian would sit down with me and explain it properly, but it mystifies me. Anyway, just threw that in.
Okay, someone else is asking about your questions on the monarchy. So the connection here is, of course, that as king, Charles is defender of the faith, and at his coronation swore to uphold the privileges of the Anglican bishops. So the question is, do you believe that whilst we still have a monarchy, religion will always be privileged by the state?
I probably can't go there either. I've been thinking about, I got lost in this today about, I've probably said lots of things I shouldn't have said, but I probably can't go there. But it's quite a spectacle, isn't it?
Isn't it just? Okay, understood. So Elizabeth Rogers just sent something in just to clarify the BBC. It regards thought for the day. The formal line apparently from the BBC is that religious beliefs monopolise what is construed as moral action, which is, well, that's highly debatable.
Did the BBC actually say that, did they?
I've never heard them say that, but
I doubt it.
That's what Elizabeth says the line is. I've never heard that myself, but that would be worrying if true. Suzanne, about the teacher in Batley, I had the opportunity to meet Annalise Dodds yesterday. So she's quite senior in Labour Party.
Yes, she is.
Circles. She seemed completely unaware of the fact that the teacher in Batley is still living in hiding. So keen to be inclusive of everything, in fact, pandering to the bigots, in my opinion.
Well, I tried to say that, but what's the person's name who just said that?
Susanna.
Susanna, you said it in fewer words than me, and you said it very well. Absolutely right. I think it's a national scandal.
Absolutely right. Okay. So possibly the final question. We do need to wrap up soon. So, how do you see the role of religion in Britain evolving in British society, and what impact do you think it's going to have on community? So you've seen the trends. Obviously, church going has been in decline for the best part of a century now. The latest census suggested that first-time Christianity is in a minority situation. We've had Office of National Statistics and British Social Attitude surveys showing that possibly the non-religious are now in a majority. Obviously, that's not what the census showed. But, the general trend has been quite clear. Do you think the trend will continue in that way? And if it does, what do you think the implications are for things like faith schools and an established church and all the rest of it?
Well, also there's the impact of immigration as well, which will be pulling it in the other direction as well.
Yeah, we've seen a growth of non-religiosity, but also minority religions as well have seen significant growth.
And I think it relates back to the complexity phobia thing that I was talking about earlier on. I think that the successful churches, and they don't have the imprimatur of approval from me necessarily. I'm just saying, objectively, the successful churches will be the church of certainty. I think in these times, in these end times, I think the church of certainty. But I hope and I believe, and this is where the hope is, that there's a growing body of logical, rational, thoughtful opinion that is walking in step with progressively liberal politics as well. The sort of politics that doesn't. If you compare those attitudes to LGBTQ plus from those 20 years ago, 25 years ago, that makes my heart sing with joy. And what also makes my heart sing with joy is the fact that there are many people of faith who are on that, to use the hackneyed word at the beginning, who are also on that journey too. If you look at attitudes within the Church of England, for example, which, in parentheses, is perhaps not the church of certainty, but it shows that there are people of faith, because we shouldn't characterize people of faith. We shouldn't criticize others for characterizing minorities on as a monolith and on those loudest representatives. People of faith come in many forms and believe many different things, and I'm really pleased to hear that there are many people of faith who are secularists as well. So I think it's that, and I think it's the church of certainty. But I think there are reasons to be cheerful. If you think about what people thought 10, 15, 20, 25 years ago, we've come a long way. We've referred to this. We have hurdles and we have challenges and we have pitfalls, but we're heading in the right direction.
Good. Okay, a positive note on which to leave it, I think. So we do need to wrap up now. But before we go, I just want to thank you, Nikki.
Pleasure.
Time really, as I said earlier, refreshing, entertaining, and enjoyable talk. So thank you ever so much. And if you're not a member but support the work we do, please do join us. All of our work at the NSS is funded by our members and supporters, and we really can't do it without you. So if you want to join, head over to our website this afternoon, and you can do that there. And if you are a member, please do consider joining us for our Members' Day, which is coming up.
There's a question here. I'm just looking at the questions. There's a question here. Did Jesus exist?
Yeah. Do you want to answer that one? I did see that one in there.
Do you want the definitive answer?
Go on. Or this would be a good chance to plug your podcast, perhaps. With that,
I think, yeah. In fact, on the podcast, we did actually get it's a different say. On one of the podcasts, we got a Satanist and an evangelical Christian in conversation with each other on the podcast. So that's worth listening to. And also, Ibrahim Mogra took us to the Islamic paradise and told us what that was going to like. It was a virtual tour of the Islamic paradise. If you're interested in that sort of stuff, that was interesting. Did Jesus exist? I would refer people to the books of Bart Ehrman, who's he does Aramaic and he does ancient Greek. And he's a former evangelical Christian, and he is one of the foremost scholars, biblical scholars. And he makes lots of interesting points about things that are in the Bible that are uncomfortable, that Jesus said and Jesus did, which doesn't align with the traditional view of Jesus. But the reason that they're in the Bible, the uncomfortable stuff like leave your family for me and various other things, is because he must have said them. So there must have been somebody. And Bart Ehrman's conclusion is, did Jesus exist? It's a brilliant book. Did Jesus exist? Yes. But
there's another question here. Was Hitler a Catholic? I don't know if you want to go there.
Well, apparently 40% of the Waffen SS were practicing Catholics. And when who was excommunicated by the church? I think it was Goering, or one of them was excommunicated by one of the leading Nazis was excommunicated by the Catholic Church for marrying a Protestant.
Okay, some nice comments coming through. Super enjoyable, entertaining, inspiring talk. Thank you from David. Yasmin, thank you for a great lecture and discussion. Yeah, absolutely echo that. But that is all for today. Thanks again, Nikki, for joining us. Really appreciated it. And thank you everyone who joined us this afternoon as well. Really appreciate you coming along. So thank you. See you next time. Bye for now.
Thank you. Bye. Thanks, everyone.